What were the biggest surprises in the NBA draft? Who is leading the WNBA in three-point percentages? What happened in tennis? What is the latest update on the Club World Cup? Let's talk about it. Hello everyone, welcome back to a brand new episode of Ball Talk with Chanel. In this episode, we're going to be talking about everything that's happened in the last week, from the latest news to the latest trades to even discussing what happened during the draft last week. So, this episode will be split into 4 sections. So, in the first section, we will be discussing everything that's happened in the NBA. We just wrapped up the NBA Finals last week, so we will be discussing Game 7 as well as provide some final thoughts about the final series and the postseason overall. And then we will be talking about the NBA draft, what were the biggest surprises and what were the biggest wins that came out of this draft. And then finally, we will be talking about 3 big trades that I think has shocked everyone. Next, we're going to be talking about the WNBA. We have the All-Star game coming up relatively soon, so we will be talking about the All-Star voting first returns. Then we will be discussing all the WNBA leaders and major stats, whether it's field goal percentage and rebounds, assists, and even steals, etc., etc. And then finally, we will be talking about the latest injury report on Fever star Caitlin Clark. And then in the next section, we will be talking about tennis. Now, we will be discussing both men's tennis and the HSBC Championship final that was just last week. And then we will be talking about the Berlin Open for women's tennis. And then in the last section, we will be talking about soccer. We are in the middle of the Club World Cup, so we will be discussing what has happened in the last week for 3 big teams. And then on top of that, we are going to be talking about a particular sale of ownership of a particular Premier League team that kind of shocked the internet. So, with all that being said, let's get on with the episode. So, starting with the first section, the NBA. Like I mentioned before, we did wrap up the NBA Finals last week, so let's recap Game 7. So, Game 7 was the big moment for everyone. None of the fans or people on social media thought that the finals would make it this far. There has been no final series since 2016 when the Cleveland Cavaliers made the 3-1 comeback against the Golden State Warriors. Has there ever been a Game 7 in the NBA Finals? So, this is a big shocker for both the Pacers fans and also for Thunder fans. Now, of course, this is a big moment also for both teams, trying to see who's going to win it all. Now, it was a very much back and forth game in the first quarter, and then you had the major injury. Tyrese Halliburton went down with a major leg injury that was later revealed to be torn Achilles injury. Now, of course, this hurt his teammates all around. Everyone knew it was just a bad injury from the way he was punching the ground, the way he was crying. Everyone knew it was just not good whatsoever. Now, of course, the Pacers were all devastated. Everyone was really emotional. You have players such as Pascal Siakam and TJ McConnell, who was really trying to talk to the team, make sure that everyone can really make sure that they win this game on behalf of Tyrese. And look, they made it pretty close, but ultimately the Pacers were not able to make this comeback. The Thunder ended up winning 103-92, with Shea ending the game with 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 12 assists, and Jalen Williams ending the game with 20 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists. They came up big for this team. TJ McConnell also had a really good game, ending the game with 16 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists, and Pascal Siakam also had a good game for the team, ending the game with 16 points, 4 rebounds, and 2 assists. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander won Finals MVP, and the Thunder was able to take home their 2nd franchise championship. Now, there has been some debates online as to whether the Oklahoma City Thunder could still make it to the finals if some of the injuries that has happened along the way did not occur. So, let's talk about it in the order in which it happened. So, in the first round of the playoffs, if we all recall, the Oklahoma City Thunder faced the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, during that series, Memphis star Ja Morant went down with a left hip contusion and actually had to miss a game. Now, I do think that even if Ja Morant was still healthy, Oklahoma would have still won the series. Even in games 1 and 2, when Ja was healthy, the Grizzlies were still struggling against OKC. OKC is fundamentally the strongest team in the Western Conference for this season. So, do I think if Ja was healthy, Memphis would have won one more game? Yeah, I do. But ultimately, I don't think that with Ja, that the Grizzlies would have actually won against OKC. OKC is just too strong of a team. So either way, I do think that the Thunder was going to move on. Now, in the semifinals, the Oklahoma City Thunder faced the Denver Nuggets. Now, during that series, Aaron Gordon actually suffered a hamstring injury. So, the question is, if Aaron Gordon was healthy, could OKC still win and make it to the Western Conference Finals? Now, I do think that they would have still won because Oklahoma City Thunder is still a stronger team. Now, don't get me wrong. This is fundamentally the same Denver Nuggets team that won the NBA Finals 2 years ago. But what I'm going to say is that Nikola Jokic was fundamentally just carrying the team during this series. They saw little to no help from Jamal Murray. There was little to no help from Michael Porter Jr. There was little to no help from Aaron Gordon even before he got hurt. So, ultimately, I just think Oklahoma City would have just been too much for everyone. I think even though Nikola Jokic was having crazy triple doubles, I think it just ultimately is not enough. So I think OKC would have still won. Now here's where it gets interesting. Okay, people have argued that if Steph Curry did not get hurt during Golden State's Western Conference semifinal series against the Minnesota Timberwolves, not only would Golden State have won that series, but they would have also beaten OKC in the Western Conference Finals. So, I don't think that Golden State would have beaten Minnesota had Steph been healthy. Okay? I don't think so. I think Minnesota, because they're a relatively younger team, they would have just locked up Steph and nobody else would have been able to carry. But for the sake of this argument, let's just say that Golden State did beat Minnesota. Okay? And they faced Oklahoma City in the Western Conference Finals. I think OKC would have still won because, again, I do think that all they would have done is just locked up Steph. I don't think that Jimmy Butler would have went off. I mean, we saw what happened when Steph was out, how Jimmy Butler couldn't carry. I don't think Podziemski's going to go off. I don't think Draymond Green's going to go off. I mean, who exactly on that team is going to take over for Steph? Right? Even if Steph is healthy, if he's struggling offensively, who exactly is going to take over? And I don't think that there's anybody else on that team that would have actually stepped it up. So, fundamentally, I think even if Golden State made it all the way to the Western Conference Finals, I think OKC would have still won. Now, here's where it truly gets interesting, okay? People have argued that if Tyrese Haliburton did not tear his Achilles, the Pacers would have won the finals. Now, ultimately, we all know that the Pacers losing Tyrese Haliburton was a big blow for the team, right? He is one of their star players. He is one of the biggest reasons as to why the Pacers were as successful as they are during the final series. But what I will say, though, is that I have said before that I think that OKC was going to win in 7. If you want to hear about why I thought so, you can check out episode 1. But what I will say, though, is that even watching this series, okay, if Tyrese was healthy, I think that Shea would have still went off, Jalen Williams would have still went off, and I don't think that the Pacers would have really had that player, whether it's Tyrese, Pascal, TJ, whoever it may be, to really go and take over and also lock up one of those 3 Thunder players that I just mentioned. Do I think that the game would have been close? Do I think that the game would have been probably going to overtime? Yes, of course. But do I think that the Pacers with Tyrese would have been enough to beat an OKC one more time? I truly do not think so. I think that at that point, OKC would have basically just ran the Pacers basically to the ground and shut them out at the very last minute. So fundamentally, I do think that even if none of those aforementioned injuries have happened, I think OKC would have still won. They have proven themselves in the regular season to be one of the best teams, and I think that was also shown during this postseason run. So congratulations to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, let's move on away from finals talk and let's talk about the NBA draft that just happened a few days ago. Now, of course, I don't want to go over every single pick that has happened, and that's just too long. What I want to do is talk about 3 wins that I think came out from the draft and 3 big surprises that I think happened during the draft. Now, starting with the wins. Of course, the first biggest win is the Mavs picking up Cooper Flag. Now, of course, this was all as expected, but we did hear some rumors from reports that Nico Harrison and the Mavericks organization was going to trade the number one overall pick, especially with reports saying that Giannis was going to try to leave Milwaukee and KD was looking to get traded. There were a lot of concerns about whether the Mavs would have kept their number one pick. And ultimately, we saw they did, and they got a chance to pick up Cooper Flag. Now, I think this is a big win for the Mavs because as long as everyone is healthy, and I put emphasis on as long as everyone is healthy, the Mavs are going to be a scary team next season. You have Kyrie Irving, Klay Thompson, Cooper Flag, Derek Lively, and Anthony Davis. Again, assuming everyone is healthy. This should be a scary team for everyone. This is going to be a team that I think everyone needs to keep an eye out for next season, because that is a crazy lineup. So I'm glad the Mavericks organization did not fumble this whatsoever, and let's see exactly what just happens with them. So that's the first big win. The second big win, of course, is San Antonio picking up Dylan Harper. Now, this, of course, was as expected, and look, seeing Dylan Harper with someone like Stephon Castle and Victor Wembanyama, that is also going to be a nice trio. That is going to be a great young core that is, again, another team that I think people need to look out for. Okay? Now, of course, the Spurs still have De'Aaron Fox. They still have Chris Paul. They still have all these other players. But, look, having Stephon, having Dylan Harper, and Wemby, who are all extremely young, in the next few years, I could see San Antonio being a top team in the West. So I truly, truly believe that everyone needs to look out for them. Maybe not necessarily next season, but in the next few years. Now, the third big win I want to talk about is Utah picking up Ace Bailey. Now, of course, this was something that no one really expected. This is something that even Ace did not even expect. If you didn't know, Utah was actually one of the individual workouts that Ace Bailey declined. And according to reports, the reason why he declined is because Utah was not one of his preferred destinations. So everyone thought that Ace was going to go to Washington, D.C. Everyone thought he was going to be a Wizard. So kind of shocked everyone when Utah decided that they want to go and pick up Ace Bailey. Now, I do think ultimately, though, this is a big win for Utah. Because, look, you have Jordan Clarkson, you have Walker Kessler, you got Lauri Markkanen, and now you have Ace Bailey, who is a excellent shooter. Okay, he has great shot making ability. He's very athletic. Like, you just have so much coming out from Ace that it gives someone like Jordan Clarkson just another shooting option, with him facilitating the offense and being able to kick it out to a player like Ace. I think this is a big win for Utah. I don't think that any of the rumors that Ace Bailey was ungrateful and he never wanted to play for Utah, I think those are all false. I think he is truly excited to be a Jazz, and I think that this is going to be really interesting coming next season. Now, those were the three big wins I want to talk about for the draft. Now let's talk about the biggest surprises that came out from this draft, okay? First one being that Derek Queen was traded to New Orleans. Now, he was originally picked up by Atlanta, and then, of course, he was traded to New Orleans. Now, I don't know if, of course, Atlanta said, we already have Clint Capella. We don't need Derek Queen. I think that's a little silly because he can be a great substitute for Clint, but I digress. But I also think, too, that with New Orleans picking up Derek Queen is really interesting because, of course, New Orleans have Zion, but Zion has truly been injured from the moment he stepped into the NBA. We have not really seen much from him. We've seen flashes of how good he can be, but ultimately the injuries have truly hindered his NBA career. So I don't know if them picking up Queen was a way of them looking at whether they want to trade Zion or if they think that Zion's going to be hurt next season, so they want a solid backup center to take over for him. Whatever the thinking may be, it definitely revolves around either Zion being traded or Zion just being injured. Either way, just Zion not being available. So I think that's a big shocker, but it would be really interesting to see what happens because that is truly, truly interesting. The second biggest surprise that's happened during the NBA draft is the fact that the Phoenix Suns traded for both Kamen Maluwak from Duke and also Mark Williams. Now, Kamen was actually drafted by the Houston Rockets. And fundamentally, I would have loved to see him in Houston, okay? I think that if you put him in the lineup with Şengün and Ahmed and KD, like you just have a big team. But if you don't want to do that, then Common I think can come off the bench for Şengün and you're not losing a lot. But him getting traded to Phoenix is actually something that I can understand from the Phoenix side because they do need a solid rim protector, and that's where Common can actually come into play. Now, what didn't make any sense was when Phoenix went and also traded to get Mark Williams, who also plays the center position. Now, what's the plan here? Okay, we know that Common's going to need a year or two to fully develop, so let's just take Mark for now, and then Common can also come off the bench. Or is it that, oh, Common can be our starter, and then when he needs a break, then we put in Mark? Either way, this really did not make any sense. I would have liked for them to just kept Common and actually did not trade for Mark, but who knows? Maybe they just want Common to have like a little bit more time before Common Malwek becomes the starting center. Who knows? Who actually knows what happens? Now, the third biggest surprise I want to talk about is Walter Clayton Jr. being traded from Washington to Utah. Now, the Washington Wizards did pick him up at number 18, which I thought was a solid idea because they do need a point guard. But I guess they figured because they already had Trey Johnson, they already had Will Riley, that they don't really need Walter Clayton at that point. And so they traded him to Utah. Now, from Utah's standpoint, I guess he can be someone that can come in for Jordan Clarkson. Now, if you have Walter Clayton and Ace Bailey, I think that would be a really, really good backcourt duo. And so with Washington, having players such as Trey Johnson and Will Riley, you understand why they don't need a third guard. So let's see. You know, maybe this would actually work out for both teams. Who knows? Now, before we move on to the next section, let's talk about 3 big trades that has happened in the last week. So the first trade that I want to talk about is Kevin Durant. Now, I did mention in last week's episode where I thought KD was going to be traded to, so you can go check that out. But fundamentally, he just got traded to Houston. And in exchange, Houston traded Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, and 6 second-round picks. Now, I'm ultimately not going to repeat what I said last week, but I still have the same feeling that I did when I first talked about this, which is that why is it that you would go and give up a young, solid core for someone like Kevin Durant? Now, feel how you feel about Dillon Brooks. Feel how you feel about Jalen Green, right? And whether you think he had a good season or not. But ultimately, someone like Jalen Green especially, he still has time to develop. He still has time to be a better player, okay? And you just gave up both of those players as well as 6 second-round picks, which you could have used those picks to also get some young players, to get Kevin Durant, who I think is going to retire in the next couple of years. I think there is no reason as to why you would give up a young core to get a 36, 37-year-old man like Kevin Durant. But again, if you want my full breakdown, watch last week's episode. The second trade I want to talk about is Anthony Simons being traded to the Boston Celtics for Jrue Holiday. Now, of course, there was a lot more with draft picks and stuff like that, but I want to focus on this exchange. I don't understand between Milwaukee trading Jrue and now Boston trading Jrue. I don't understand why he is being traded. He is a great point guard who can facilitate the offense, still gives you scoring, and is a great defender. And you want to give him up, Boston, for Anthony Simons, who, yeah, he had a pretty solid season last season. I'm not going to say he had a bad season, but he's not a defender. He's not an offensive facilitator. So what exactly are you gaining from getting Anthony Simons, except for the fact that he's younger? That's the only thing you're basically getting from him. And so I think Portland ended up winning this trade, assuming they don't trade Jrue, because Jrue is such a great asset to a team that I think a lot of people overlook. And Boston, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if, he and Derek White are actually going to work out in the backcourt. I don't know if Boston is going to use Anthony as a way to acquire maybe another player and use him just for the means of trading. I don't know what's going to happen. But I think giving up Jrue Holiday was truly a mistake. And I think it is going to be a mistake that Boston is going to ultimately regret going down the line. Now, the third trade I want to talk about is CJ McCollum for Jordan Poole. Again, of course, there were other draft picks and everything else that was involved, but I want to focus specifically on this exchange. Now, Jordan Poole in New Orleans is actually really interesting. I think him and DeJounte Murray would actually work in the backcourt, and I think having players such as Derek Queen would make a really, really interesting Pelicans team. So I really do understand from that perspective, maybe as to why the Pelicans would go and try to get Jordan Poole. Now, for the Wizards, why would you try to get CJ McCollum? I mean, yeah, sure, he had like a pretty decent season last season, but ultimately, he's older. Like, what exactly is he going to do? Are you going to have him come off the bench? Like, he really has not been relevant. I hate to put it like that. He hasn't really been relevant since he was in Portland. So, what exactly is supposed to be the gain here? Okay. Is he supposed to be just another veteran? Is he supposed to be someone that comes off the bench? There's no way you can tell me that he is starting. There's no way. I wouldn't be shocked if he was starting, but there's no way you could tell me that. So ultimately, I don't know. Let's see what happens. Maybe this is actually a good trade for Washington. Maybe. I don't know. I just don't, as of right now, understand why Washington would make that trade. I don't think CJ would make a good fit for the team, but again, let's just see what happens. Now, keeping on the conversation about basketball, let's move on to the next section, which is all about the WNBA. Now, the WNBA All-Star Game is coming up, and we have had the All-Star voting first returns. So, we've had the top 10 players who people have voted that should be an All-Star, okay? We have Caitlin Clark, Nafisa Collier, Aaliyah Boston, Asia Wilson, Brianna Stewart, Paige Beckers, Kelsey Mitchell, Sabrina Ionescu, Lexi Hull, and Kiki Iriafen. Now, I think that is actually a solid list of people who I think should be an all-star, okay? I actually understand what you would put in those players. Now, a lot of people were complaining about, oh my gosh, there are 4 players that all play for the Fever. But that's fundamentally what happens when you are a Fever fan. That's what happens when you are a Caitlin Clark fan. You vote for Caitlin, and then you vote for her teammates. Like, that's just fundamentally how it works. So I'm not shocked that there are 4 Fever players, but ultimately I do think all of them deserve to be all-stars. People have complained about Lexi Hull, but I'm going to talk about WNBA leaders later, but Lexi Hull is having a really, really good season. She has been such a great asset to the Fever that, yes, she absolutely deserves to be an all-star. Now, on top of this 10 players, there are 4 players who I think should be absolute all-stars. First player I'm going to talk about is Sonia Citron from the Washington Mystics. Now, she is one of the best rookies this season. Her stats are comparable to Paige Beckers. So, I think, yes, she absolutely needs to be an all-star. If you're going to put in Paige, you absolutely can put in Sonia Citron. There should be no reason why. Second player I want to talk about is Alicia Gray. Now, I do think a lot of people really overlook her, but she is having a great season. Alicia Gray is averaging 19 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists. So, just from those stats, yes, absolutely, she deserves to be an all-star. The next player I want to talk about is Nneka Ogwumike. Now, I do think that a lot of people really also overlook her. She is making history. She just passed Tina Charles in all-time rebounds. So, why is no one really talking about her? And on top of that, Nneka is averaging 18 points, 8 rebounds, and 2 assists. So, also from those stats, yes, she deserves to be an all-star. And the next player I want to talk about is Rhyne Howard. Now, she absolutely too deserves to be an all-star, averaging 18 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists. And she's also another player too that I think a lot of people don't recognize how good of a player she is. She's having such a great season, and those stats alone should tell you how good of a season she's having. Yes, she needs to be an all-star. So now let's talk about the WNBA leadership. Who is leading the WNBA in major stats? So, let's start first with field goal percentage. Aaliyah Boston leads the WNBA in field goal percentage, averaging 59.7% from the field. Right underneath her is Camila Cardoso, who is averaging 56.3% from the field. And right underneath her is Temi Fagbenle, who is averaging 54.3% from the field. And now let's look at three-point percentage. Kennedy Berg leads the WNBA in three-point percentage, averaging 53%. And then Lexi Hull and Tahina Papau are tied for second in the WNBA in three-point percentage, both averaging 50% from 3. And now looking at points per game, you have Nafisa Collier, who's averaging 24.5 points per game. Then you have Asia Wilson, who's averaging 21.3 points per game. And then you have Brianna Stewart, who's averaging 20.7 points per game. And now looking at rebounds per game. So you have Angel Reese, who leads the WNBA in rebounds per game, averaging 12.3 rebounds per game. Then you have Asia Wilson, who averages 9.3 rebounds per game. And then you have Azura Stevens from the LA Sparks, who averages 8.6 rebounds per game. And now looking at assists per game. Alyssa Thomas leads the WNBA in assists per game, averaging 9.6 assists per game. Then right underneath her is Caitlin Clark, who's averaging 8.9 assists per game. And then right underneath her is Natasha Cloud, who's averaging 6.5 assists per game. And now looking at blocks per game. First you have Asia Wilson, who's averaging 2.8 blocks per game. Then you have Alana Smith, who's averaging 2.5 blocks per game. And then you have Ezi Magbagur, who's averaging 2 blocks per game. And then looking at steals per game, you have Gabby Williams, who's averaging 2.6 steals per game. You have Asia Wilson, who's averaging 2 steals per game. And then you have Dearica Hamby, who's averaging 1.9 steals per game. So those are the WNBA leaders as of right now. You can see that Asia Wilson is top 3 in a lot of these stats. So when people say that Asia Wilson is not one of the best players in the league, I really question what WNBA they're watching and whether they're paying attention to anything. Because the stats I just mentioned right there really indicates that Asia Wilson is top 3 in a lot of the major categories. So not understanding where exactly they get it from. Now, before we move on to the next section, I want to talk about the latest injury report on Fever star Caitlin Clark. Now, she was out for the last 2 games with a left groin injury. Now, if you remember back a couple weeks ago, she went out for a while with a left quad strain. And so there's a little bit of a concern because the season just started and she has already been out for 2 different injuries. Now, a lot of people want to say, oh my gosh, it's because of the refs and she has been assaulted and blah, 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 blah. No, she hasn't. Basketball is a very physical game. You see that a lot of players are being physical towards one another. It's not just Caitlin Clark. So please stop, okay? Give an example. During the Fever Sun game, when Sophie Cunningham put JC Sheldon in basically a chokehold while JC was driving to the basket. No one is doing that to Caitlin. I think the problem right now of why Caitlin Clark is getting hurt is because the Fever would not rest her. Okay? So, just like how I mentioned earlier with Tyrese Halliburton tearing his Achilles, unfortunately, if the Fever does not rest her, that major injury could happen to Caitlin. Okay? You need to rest her. She can't do everything. You can't keep putting her in 30, 40 minutes a game, especially immediately after coming off of something like a left quad strain. Because that's exactly what happened. And so, if Stephanie White and the rest of the Fever organization do not decide that they need to let Caitlin rest, then unfortunately, we're going to see her have more injuries like this. She is going to be more prone to injuries. So, it has nothing to do with how the players are treating her. It has nothing to do with the refs allowing people to assault her or anything else like that. It fundamentally has to do with the fact that she gets no rest. So hopefully this is a wake-up call for the Fever organization for Stephanie White, and hopefully she can be substituted out more often. Before we continue, please be sure to check out the description box down below, which tells you about all of my social media pages, my TikTok, my Instagram, my Facebook, my Snapchat, my X account, my Threads account, are all at Ball Talk with Chanel. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please be sure to follow this page and hit the like button on this video so you do not miss a single episode. If you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to turn on notifications so you do not miss a single episode. Now, back to the episode. So now let's move on to the third section, which is all about tennis. So I want to start first with the HSBC Championship that happened in London for men's tennis. Now, Carlos Alcaraz is coming off of a Wimbledon win against Jannik Sinner. Now, during the semifinal, Carlos Alcaraz actually faced Roberto Bautista Agut and ended up winning in 2 straight sets. And then he advanced to the final where he was to face Yuri Lehecka. and he ended up winning 2-1, where he won in the first set and then lost in the second set and ended up closing out the match altogether, winning the third set. Now, of course, coming off from back-to-back wins for Alcaraz really shows you how dominant of a player he is. So let's see what is in store for him for the future. Now let's move on to women's tennis, where we had the Berlin Open. Now, of course, we're coming off from the French Open final, where Coco Gauff defeated Aryna Sabalenka. And now they are both in this Berlin Open. Now, starting with Coco Gauff, she did lose in the round of 16 against Wang Xinyu, and she lost in 2 straight sets. Now, Xinyu did advance to the final, and she was to face Marketa Vondrousova, who actually defeated Sabalenka in the semifinal. Now, Xinyu ended up losing in 3 sets, where she lost the first set and then tried to make a comeback and won the second set, but ultimately could not complete the comeback and lost in the third set. So Marketa ended up winning the Berlin Open. So now let's move on to the very last section, which is all about soccer. So first, let's recap what has happened in the Club World Cup. Let's start first with PSG, the team that won the Champions League. Now, they did win 2-0 against the Seattle Sounders, and they advanced to the round of 16. And then looking at Messi and Inter Miami, they did tie 2-2 against Palmeiras, and they are advancing also to the round of 16. So Messi will be facing his former team in the round of 16, so let's see what happens. Now let's talk about Real Madrid. They did win 3-0 against Pachuca, and during the match, Rudiger claimed that Pachuca's Cabral actually said a racial slur to him. Now, FIFA, of course, is opening up an investigation, an anti-discriminatory investigation at that, against Cabral, and so we would have to wait to see what ends up being the result of it. And then Real Madrid, coming off of this win against Pachuca, faced Salzburg, and they end up losing 3-0. Now, despite this loss, they do advance to the round of 16, and they will be playing Juventus. So let's see exactly what happens. Now, moving away from Club World Cup, let's talk about the major purchase that has happened. So, New York Jets owner Woody Johnson is purchasing a 43% stake of Crystal Palace. He's purchasing this stake from John Textor, who has had that stake since 2021. The deal is worth about 190 million pounds, which converted to US dollars is about $250 million. Now, of course, this sale comes, because there need to be some compliance with multi-ownership rules. Now, John Textor, for context, is the owner of Eagle Football. That is how he was able to purchase his stake in Crystal Palace. Now, Eagle Football also owned the team Lyon. Now, Lyon and Crystal Palace are both qualified for the Europa League. And so, of course, because there are rules and regulations about owning multiple teams, of course, Textor had to sell his ownership of Crystal Palace. And so, now this comes as a really big deal for Woody Johnson. He is the majority owner now for the team. And so, let's see, maybe he'll allow Crystal Palace to have a turnaround season for the next season. Let's see exactly what happens. So this is all for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to tune in next Monday at 6 a.m. so you can stay all caught up what's happening in sports. See you next week. Bye.